I'm 24, working at a nonprofit focused on workplace equality. Have younger brother John. He's 18 when this starts. Finally understand how deeply the patriarchy has poisoned everything after taking some eye-opening sociology courses in college. Realize I have a responsibility to educate the men in my life, starting with family. John is at that crucial age where his worldview is still forming. Perfect opportunity to help him become one of the good ones. Start having conversations with John every morning over breakfast. Explain how his very existence as a male gives him unearned advantages. Point out how he never has to think about his safety walking alone at night. Mention how every space he enters automatically centers his voice over women's. John, you need to understand that just by being born male, you're complicit in a system that oppresses half the population. He mostly just nods and eats his cereal quietly. Think I'm making real progress. Few weeks in, catch John leaving dishes in the sink. Perfect teaching moment. This is exactly what I'm talking about, John. You just assume someone else will clean up after you, that someone is usually a woman. You're perpetuating domestic labor inequality. He mumbles an apology and washes the dishes. Feel satisfied that the lesson is sinking in. Start noticing more of these teachable moments everywhere. John gets accepted to his first choice college. Family celebrates at dinner. Can't help but point out the obvious. John, you realize your acceptance rate was statistically higher because you're male, right? Admissions committees unconsciously favor male applicants in many fields. Mom gives me a look, but I continue. I'm not saying you're not smart, but we have to acknowledge these systemic advantages. John gets quiet for the rest of dinner. Later, hear him on phone with his girlfriend. Voice sounds strained. Become more committed to John's education as months pass. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to expand his awareness. He mentions wanting to join debate team, explain how male voices dominate debate culture, and how he'll automatically be taken more seriously. He talks about his part-time job, discuss the wage gap, and how his male coworkers probably get better treatment. He complains about feeling tired. Remind him that women face chronic fatigue from emotional labor that men never have to perform. Notice John becoming more withdrawn around month 6. Interpret this as him processing the uncomfortable truths I'm sharing. Double down on the education, because resistance means I'm hitting something real. John, your discomfort with these conversations is exactly the kind of fragility that maintains oppressive systems. He starts avoiding family dinners, says he's not hungry, clearly struggling with cognitive dissonance as his worldview shifts. Year 2 begins, and I've really hit my stride. Developed a comprehensive approach to addressing his internalized male supremacy. Morning education sessions now cover intersectionality, emotional labor theory, the historical context of patriarchal violence. Every woman you interact with has to constantly calculate whether you might be a threat, John. That's the reality we live in because of men like you. He asks, what I mean by men like you. Explain that all men participate in threatening behavior whether they realize it or not. John starts seeing a school counselor around this time, probably healthy for him to have additional support as he processes these difficult realizations. Mention to Mom that therapy might help him work through his defensive reactions to necessary social education. Mom suggests maybe I should ease up on the political discussions. Explain that staying silent would make me complicit in his continued ignorance. Catch John crying in his room one evening. Knock and enter to provide comfort and context. I know this is overwhelming. John, recognizing your privilege is supposed to be uncomfortable. That discomfort means you're finally seeing clearly. He wipes his eyes and asks me to leave. Explain that his desire to avoid these conversations is itself a form of male privilege. Women don't get to opt out of experiencing oppression. Year 3. John is now 21 and still living at home while attending local community college. Perfect, because it means I can continue his education without interruption. Notice he's developed some concerning behaviors. Sleeping too much, isolating from friends, barely speaking during family interactions. Interpret these as signs that the deprogramming process is working, but causing necessary growing pains. Decide to address his social relationships directly. John, I've been thinking about your friendship with Jake and those guys. Male friendships often reinforce toxic patterns of behavior. You probably engage in casual misogyny without realizing it. He says they mostly just play video games. Video games are actually a major vector for male socialization around dominance and violence. Plus, gaming culture is notoriously hostile to women. Suggests he examine whether these relationships are hindering his growth. John mentions considering transferring to a 4-year university. Immediately see the problem with this plan. John, college campuses are basically training grounds for entitlement. Fraternity culture, hookup culture, the whole environment reinforces predatory masculinity. Explain how college men perpetuate rape culture through seemingly innocent social interactions. Even if you think you're being respectful, you're still part of a system that terrorizes women on campus. He goes quiet and doesn't bring up transfer plans again. Around year 4, John develops what looks like social anxiety. Rarely leaves the house except for work and classes. Spends most of his time in his room. When he does interact with family, he seems nervous and jumpy, clearly struggling to integrate the harsh realities. I've been helping him understand. Remind him that discomfort with his own masculinity is actually a sign of developing consciousness. One evening, John brings home a girl from work, Sarah. She seems nice, but I have a responsibility to educate her too. During dinner, explain to Sarah how women often unconsciously center male comfort in relationships. Sarah, you should examine whether you're performing emotional labor for John without reciprocation. Women are socialized to manage men's feelings. Notice John getting agitated, but continue. Most heterosexual relationships recreate patriarchal power dynamics, even when both people think they're being progressive. Sarah leaves early, says she has homework. John storms out after her. Next morning, confront John about his reaction. Your anger last night was a perfect example of male fragility. You couldn't handle having your relationship examined critically. He says, I embarrassed him in front of Sarah. Your embarrassment is less important than Sarah understanding how gender dynamics work. John, check your priorities. Explain that his desire to protect his comfort over women's education is textbook male behavior. He doesn't respond, just stares at his coffee. Notice John has stopped bringing friends around entirely. Probably for the best, since most male friendships reinforce problematic attitudes anyway. Mention this observation to him. I've noticed you're not socializing as much, John. Are you starting to recognize how male social groups can be toxic? He nods, but seems distracted. Explain how solitude can actually be healthy when it's used for self-reflection and consciousness raising. Year 5 brings new challenges, as John seems to be developing some kind of depression. Sleeps until afternoon on weekends, barely engages in conversations, has dropped most of his hobbies and activities. When I try to discuss current events or social justice issues, he gives one-word responses, clearly overwhelmed by the weight of understanding his position in oppressive systems. Decide. John needs more intensive education since subtle approaches aren't working. Start leaving articles and books on his desk about male violence, toxic masculinity, historical oppression of women. John, your education can't just be passive anymore. You need to actively engage with these materials. Find the books untouched weeks later. Explain that his avoidance of educational materials is itself a form of male privilege. Women don't get to ignore the realities of oppression. Over here, John on phone with someone sounds like he's discussing therapy. Good professional support might help him process the cognitive dissonance more effectively. Later, ask about his sessions. Therapy is confidential, he says. Explain that transparency about his growth process would actually be more accountable. Keeping your emotional work private is another way men avoid responsibility for their development. Year 6, John is 24 now and seems to be getting worse instead of better. Has developed noticeable anxiety around me specifically. Leaves rooms when I enter, avoids making eye contact during conversations. When forced to interact, he seems genuinely afraid, clearly struggling with internalized shame about his masculine socialization, which is actually progress. Decide to address his avoidance behavior directly. John, I've noticed you've been avoiding conversations with me. This kind of defensive behavior is exactly how men maintain their ignorance. He says he's just tired. Claiming fatigue to avoid accountability is a classic male deflection tactic. Women are tired too, John. but we don't get to check out of fighting oppression. Explain that his resistance to education is causing more harm than the education itself. Catch John researching apartments online one evening. Immediately concerned about this development. John, are you thinking about moving out? Because geographic distance won't solve your internal work around masculinity. He closes the laptop quickly. Explain that running away from uncomfortable truths is peak male behavior. You can't just relocate to escape the patriarchy, John. It follows you wherever you go because you carry it inside you. John starts working longer hours, picks up extra shifts, clearly using work to avoid necessary family time and education. Point out this pattern to him. Work addiction is actually a form of masculine toxicity. John men use career focus to avoid emotional labor and personal growth. Suggests he examine whether he's using employment to maintain his privilege and avoid accountability. He says he's saving money for what? Another escape plan. You can't buy your way out of doing the work, John. Year 7 arrives, and John seems like a completely different person. Thin, anxious, barely speaks above a whisper, has developed a noticeable tremor in his hands, jumps when doors close too loudly, spends entire days in his room without emerging. When Mom expresses concern, explain that dismantling toxic masculinity is naturally traumatic. He's finally understanding the harm he's capable of causing just by existing as a man in this world. That's heavy, but necessary. Try to have a comprehensive conversation with John about his 7-year journey. John, I want you to know how proud I am of the work you've been doing. I know it's been difficult to confront your privilege and potential for harm. He doesn't respond, just stares at the wall. Your silence is concerning, though. Women need male allies who can articulate their understanding and commitment to change. Explain that silent allyship isn't enough. He needs to actively denounce masculinity and advocate for women. Notice John has been making phone calls late at night. Sounds like he's talking to someone about getting out and starting over. Become concerned that he might be falling back into male social patterns. Decide to address this directly. John, if you're reconnecting with old friends, you need to be careful not to slip back into toxic masculine behaviors. Male friendships can undo years of progress. One morning, John doesn't come down for breakfast. Check his room, completely empty. All his belongings gone. Note on the pillow that just says, "Don't look for me." Panic immediately and call his phone. Go straight to voicemail. Message says his number is no longer in service. Spend the next week frantically calling everyone we know. His old friends say they haven't heard from him in years. His workplace says he quit via email and requested his final check be mailed. His therapist won't share information due to confidentiality. Mom contacts police, but they say adults can disappear voluntarily. Slowly realize John has completely vanished from our lives. Weeks turn into months with no contact. Hire a private investigator who finds nothing. Check social media obsessively, but John never had much online presence anyway. Mom cries constantly and keeps asking what we did wrong. Try to explain that this is probably just John needing space to process his growth. He'll come back when he's ready to engage authentically with the work. 6 months pass and reality starts setting in. John has completely erased himself from our lives, changed his phone number, closed his social media accounts, left no forwarding address, even stopped using his credit cards, according to the investigator. Mom keeps suggesting that maybe my educational approach was too intense. Explained that victims often blame themselves rather than examining systemic issues. Finally, get a lead from the investigator. Someone matching Jay's description was seen in Oregon, living under a different name, working at a small bookstore. When contacted, the person denies knowing anyone named John. Investigator says the voice sounded right, but the man claimed to have no family in our state. Realize John has literally recreated his entire identity to escape us. The weight of this hits me all at once. John didn't just move away or need space. He completely erased his past life, changed his name, his location, his entire existence. Spent months planning this elaborate escape. Chose to become a stranger rather than continue living as my brother. For the first time in years, feel genuinely uncertain about something. Try calling the bookstore in Oregon repeatedly. Hang up each time someone answers. Finally, work up courage to speak. Is this John? This is your sister. I just want to talk. Long pause then. I don't have a sister. Please don't call here again. He hangs up, and when I call back, they say that employee no longer works there. Realize he's probably moved again. We'll keep moving to stay hidden from me. Spend weeks in a haze of confusion and growing horror. Replay conversations from the past 7 years. Remember his anxiety, his isolation, the way he flinched when I entered rooms. Start to wonder if maybe my educational approach was somehow misunderstood. No, that's not possible. Everything I taught him was factually correct. Maybe he just wasn't ready to handle the truth about masculinity. Mom finds John's old journals while cleaning his room. Reads passages aloud about feeling trapped, like a monster, afraid of myself. Entries about sleepless nights, wondering if he was inherently bad. Detailed plans for disappearing that go back 2 years. Descriptions of panic attacks when hearing footsteps in the hallway. Repeated mentions of feeling hopeless and beyond redemption. Mom asks me to listen to what he was really saying. Read through pages of John describing conversations we had. His perspective makes everything sound different somehow. He wrote about feeling like he couldn't move or speak without confirming something terrible about himself. Described constant fear of proving my points about male awfulness. Detailed self-hatred and confusion about his basic existence. Plans for escaping before I hurt someone. Growing certainty that he was irredeemably toxic. One entry from 6 months before he left. Talked to therapist about the constant education sessions with sister. She used the word psychological abuse, which feels extreme, but I can't deny how afraid I am all the time. Sister is just trying to help me be better. Maybe I'm too broken to be helped. Maybe disappearing is the kindest thing I can do for everyone. Feel something cold and terrible settling in my stomach. Start to see 7 years of interactions from a completely different angle. John wasn't resisting education. He was drowning in shame. He wasn't avoiding accountability. He was planning his escape. He wasn't processing masculine toxicity. He was having a complete psychological breakdown. And I kept pushing harder because I thought his pain meant progress. Try to call Oregon numbers frantically for weeks. Finally reached someone who knew him at the bookstore. He seemed haunted. She says like he was running from something terrible. Never talked about his past. Explains that he left suddenly after getting phone calls from someone claiming to be family. He said his past was dead and he needed to keep it that way. Gives me the name he was using. David. He chose to become someone else entirely, rather than remain my brother. Realize with growing horror that John genuinely believes he escaped from something abusive. He literally changed his identity to get away from me. Spent months planning an elaborate disappearance. Chose homelessness and poverty over living in the same house as me. Erased 7 years of sibling relationship because he experienced it as trauma. But everything I taught him was correct. Men do have privilege. Masculinity is toxic. How could helping him understand these truths be abuse? Mom stopped speaking to me after reading the journals. Says she should have intervened years ago. Describes watching John deteriorate and assuming it was just young adult angst. He was terrified of you. She says, I thought you two were just having philosophical debates. Explains that she heard him crying at night, but John always said everything was fine. He was protecting you even while you were destroying him. Moves out to stay with her sister. Says she needs space. Completely alone now. Keep rereading Jay's journals. One entry stops me cold. Sister asked if I understand that women have to calculate whether I'm a threat. Spent 3 hours researching male violence statistics. Realized I probably am dangerous and don't even know it. Maybe the safest thing is to never interact with women again. Maybe sister is right and I'm a monster who just hasn't shown it yet. Another entry from 2 years ago. Having thoughts about self-harm again. Sister explained how male suicide is actually violence against women because it abandons emotional responsibility. She's right that even my pain centers myself over others, trapped between wanting to die and not wanting to harm anyone by dying. Maybe disappearing is the compromise. Understand now that John wasn't learning about privilege. He was learning to hate himself. Each conversation I thought was educational was actually convincing him he was fundamentally wrong and dangerous. He internalized every critique of masculinity as proof of his personal evil. Spent years believing he was a potential rapist, abuser, monster. Planned his disappearance as an act of service to protect the world from himself. Try therapy myself. Finally explained to counselor how I was trying to educate my brother about patriarchy. She listens without judgment as I describe 7 years of morning conversations, accountability sessions, constant corrections. When I finish, she's quiet for a long time. What you're describing sounds like systematic psychological abuse. She finally says, explain that everything I told him was factually true. Truth without love or context can be a weapon, she responds. Therapist helps me understand that I took legitimate social criticism and turned it into personal attacks. Explains how constant negativity about someone's identity creates trauma and self-hatred. Describes the psychological impact of never feeling safe or accepted in your own home. Points out that I gave John no path toward redemption or acceptance. You taught him he was bad for existing, but never gave him a way to be good. Start to see how my approach was actually counterproductive to everything I claimed to want. Instead of creating a feminist ally, I created someone so damaged by shame, he had to disappear. Instead of educating him about privilege, I convinced him he was irredeemably evil. Instead of helping women by improving a man, I drove him to complete isolation from society. My methods achieved the exact opposite of my stated goals. Spend months trying to track down John through his new identity. Hire different investigators. Search social media for the name David. Call random bookstores in Pacific Northwest. Finally accept that he's gone permanently. Not just geographically missing, but psychologically destroyed the person he used to be. The brother who trusted me enough to listen for 7 years no longer exists. I killed him with kindness that wasn't kind at all. Write letter after letter that I'll never be able to send. Dear John, I'm sorry I made you afraid of yourself. Dear John, I was wrong about how to create change. Dear John, you deserved love, not constant criticism. Dear John, please come home so I can learn how to be your sister again. Know that even if I could reach him, the damage is permanent. Trust broken. This completely doesn't heal. Mom eventually agrees to see me for coffee. She looks older, sadder. Do you understand what you did? She asks. Try to explain that my intentions were good. John needed to understand his privilege. She cuts me off. John needed to feel loved by his sister. Everything else was just your ego. Realize that 7 years of education was really 7 years of me feeling superior. I got to be the enlightened one, the teacher, the one with answers. John got to be the problem that needed fixing. I turned my little brother into a project instead of treating him like a person. Fed my own sense of righteousness by constantly correcting and improving him. Never once asked if he felt loved or safe or accepted. Therapist suggests I examine why I needed John to be wrong for me to be right. Points out that healthy education includes encouragement, praise, and unconditional love. Explains that I created an environment where John could never be good enough. You set up a dynamic where his very existence was a problem to be solved. Realize I was performing feminism at John's expense. Used him as a receptacle for all my anger about patriarchy. Try to imagine what those 7 years felt like from Jay's perspective. Constant daily reminders that he was part of a harmful group. Every achievement diminished by explanations of his privilege. Every interaction scrutinized for evidence of toxic masculinity. No safe space where he could just exist without being evaluated. Growing certainty that he was fundamentally flawed and dangerous. Remember how he used to light up when he saw me before this all started? How he'd ask for help with homework and tell me about his day? How we used to watch movies together and share inside jokes. I destroyed all of that in the name of making him a better person. Replaced sibling love with ideological instruction. Turned his big sister into his daily reminder of his worthlessness. Worst part is realizing John probably still believes everything I taught him. Wherever he is, he's probably still convinced he's dangerous. Probably avoids relationships because he thinks he's inherently harmful. Probably lives in constant shame about his gender and existence. I didn't just take away his family. I took away his ability to feel good about himself. Keep hoping for some sign that he's okay. Search for David's name in Oregon newspapers. Worried about suicide. Or worse, check missing persons reports compulsively. Realize that John might be safer and happier completely away from me. Maybe My absence from his life is the kindest thing I can give him now. But the not knowing is killing me slowly. Understand now that I confused being right with being helpful, confused education with domination, confused consciousness raising with psychological torture, took my anger about systemic injustice and focused it on one person who trusted me, made John carry the weight of all masculine harm while denying him any masculine worth. Therapist asks what I would say to John if I could see him one more time. Realize I'd want to tell him he's good, that he was always good, that his gender doesn't make him a monster, that he deserves love and peace and happiness, that I was wrong about almost everything, that he should stay gone if that's what keeps him safe from me. Know that John is probably reading this somehow, wherever he is. If you see this, I'm sorry. You were a good brother, and I was a terrible sister. John chose to become David because being my brother was too painful. He's probably happier now, probably healing, probably learning to see himself as human again instead of a walking threat. Maybe he'll find love someday with someone who sees his worth. Hope he's somewhere safe, being kind to himself, remembering his value. Hope he never has to think about me again because I'm the one who taught him to hate himself. And that's unforgivable. If this confession kept you hooked, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We share powerful true stories every day that explore the complex realities of life.